Good morning, everyone, and we are welcome to today's third showcase on soil archiving on our Africa Soil Information Community of Practice. Before we start the discussion, I would like to give a brief overview of our community. So the Soil Data and Information Community of Practice group started in May 2023 with 126 members, and currently we have 624 members from 31 African countries, and we have also 26 ambassadors from 11 African countries. And as you can see on the screen over here, the green shaded countries shows the countries where currently we have members in the community, and we hope to get to the other gray areas within Africa. The vision of the Community of Practice group is to share ideas and strengthen collaboration among experts or professionals in soil science, also to collectively guide discussions and also for professional development and lead innovation and for soil information and soil information system development, and also collaborate with experts to co-develop standards for all soil information workflow steps and to strengthen interdisciplinary connections among experts in this field. The goal is mainly to share knowledge, also to foster collaboration and networking, and also for education and capacity building, to strengthen capacity building. Main activities of the group include webinars, also showcase events. We also have the Ask the Experts session. We also collaborate with joint publications, and also we organize trainings. And there are also regular interactions via communications and networking platforms where experts meet to discuss issues in soil information. To become a member of the community, you can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can also visit the website on the ISRIC website. You can also follow up interactions on the LinkedIn page of the COP and engage in interactions among ourselves. The second element of the COP is the resource library, where there are tools for tutorials, books, guides, and other resources which help to strengthen or improve the knowledge base in the soil information area of where we are specializing in. To get access to this resource library, you can scan the QR code on your screen, or you can also visit the website, that is the resource.isric.org. Yeah, thank you very much, and I would hand over the floor to Crow to take it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for the introduction. I may introduce today my colleagues, Stephan Mantel. He's a sustainable land management expert and head of World Soil Museum. He's also in charge of the physical collection, and he coordinates the related educational activities within our museum. So thank you very much, Stephan, for joining today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Crow. And I'm happy to be here this morning and talk about soil archiving, which is, in my view, an important topic. So I've been already introduced, so I will not introduce myself. I'll be talking about soil archiving in the physical collections of ISRIC. Well, I'm responsible for the activities of the museum and also curator of the collections. And Mara Grandia is my colleague who also collaborates in the museum and also with the collections. And I think you have met her already, and she'll be your main contact point in this subgroup. Yes, so I will talk about what is an archive actually, because I noticed in the initial discussions in the group that there were different perceptions and maybe some confusion even about what is an archive. So I'd like to dedicate some time on this. So what do we talk about when we speak about archive and soil collections? I'll talk about soil physical collections and focus on the collection of ISRIC as an example. And also what is the use and the potential use of physical soil collections. And then I think there's time for questions and answers and discussion. So what is an archive? It's a collection of historical documents or objects or records providing information about a place, institution, or group of people, or physical objects that we collect from nature. Yeah, and a typical archive is, for instance, a library, where you have a collection of books and documents. And mind you, a collection is not just an assembly of physical goods. It includes a process of collecting, also de-accessioning of collection objects. So the management of a collection, which includes a full registry, and also making a collection accessible in different ways, both digital and physical. An archive is an accumulation or historical records or materials in any medium or the physical facility in which they are located. So the archive is the place where the collections are stored and managed. So that's the difference between the archive and the collection. So the archive is a place that can be housed in a variety of institutions, and it's the management, or it holds the collections. So what to collect? Every collection must have a purpose and the boundaries of what is collected and what not. It requires procedures for management, use, and disclosure. And you need a collection management policy to guide this. You need the boundary conditions for what you collect and a purpose. You cannot just collect everything, which will be a waste of resources. A collection management policy is a set of policies that addresses various aspects of collection management. The policy defines the scope of the museum collections and how we care for it and how we make it accessible to the public. It also explains the roles of parties responsible for managing the museum collection. So you have different, you identify different persons responsible within the collection management for different part of the procedures. Now, ISRIC also has a management policy. We have a report on that, ISRIC World Soil Reference Collection Management Policy. And that's available online. So if you look for an example, then you can find it on our webpage and study it. Yes, so in nature studies, in science, we have a lot of collections, different collections. So, for instance, birds, plants, stones, all kind of things that we see and observe in nature and research. People have started collections, and this is to have a reference. We can continue to measure, observe, analyze the objects that we collected, but also they're a reference for the future. So if we, for instance, take birds, if we observe a new parrot or another bird species, we can go back to the sample and measure the differences to see if there's variation. And also there may be analytical methods or questions in the future that may want us to go back to the earlier sample and study it again or do new analysis that we currently are not aware of that are possible. And so there are many things that we can study and collect in nature, like birds, butterflies, but also herbaria, for instance, so the study of plants, and they provide a reference for science. But mind you, you see the large collection here. This is the Smithsonian in Washington. It also requires good registry and a whole management policy to keep it accessible, to give it value for people that want to study it, yeah, it also requires a lot of back office work. Well, do we do that in soil science? I'm sad to say not so much. ISRIC is one of the examples. We have a large collection of soil samples, soil monoliths. So a monolith is a piece from a profile wall that is taken and then preserved to display it on the wall for education and advocacy. And we have a large collection of that here in Wageningen. But usually soil scientists go to the field and they make observations of soils using augering or soil profile pit descriptions. And that is a momentary description and sampling. And the samples are then submitted to the laboratory, but not always they are preserved. And I think that, yeah, that's something that to be considered for each institution, whether you do that for one purpose only, or whether you would like to preserve some samples for future reference. And that's actually what I'm talking about now. So why do we have soil collections? A soil sample is a document of the environment through physical samples, description, analysis. It's vital for understanding soils, properties and functions. It provides clues about formation, variation functions, and human influence. But it also provides a baseline against which new observations can be compared. And we can produce and test predictive models, PTF functions, for instance, for impact of land management, acid rain, pollution, climate change. And safeguarding soil reference profiles provide a basis for soil classification. And many of the protocols in soil science, including classification, evolve through time. So we have it now as a reference, but a classification will, for instance, the World Reference Base, new diagnostic properties are defined, but then it is valuable if you have a reference set against which you can test those diagnostics. So every soil monolith and associated samples in our collection, for instance, with good data, provide a physical snapshot of a soil at a particular point in time and space. And that provides a wealth of expected and unexpected information. Performing new analysis or testing hypothesis can be done on physical samples and not from a description or a photograph. So if we have new questions on samples that were taken in the past, but not for that purpose at that moment, and if we can go back still to that sample with known properties and known description, that is of value. And I will give a few examples later in the presentation. ISRIC. So about our collections. ISRIC was founded in 1966. It was first called the International Soil Museum, and now we are called the ISRIC World Soil Information. And that was in the time when the FAO Soil Map of the World the project was started, and we were founded on initiative of UN organizations. And the purpose of the International Soil Museum at the time was that students and scientists will be able to learn from different types of soils from all around the world. So we started in 1966 with creating a global soil collection, soil monoliths and soil samples. And the museum would act as an international reference center for soil data. So, of course, our functions have evolved. We came into the digital era, and many of our functions now are on digital data. But I will limit myself now to the physical collections. We are part of the World Data System. In 1989, we became an ICSO World Data Center for Soils, and we are a World Data System regular member. And that is also important, that if you have collections, same with soil laboratories, you need connections with other in a network to have a kind of quality testing, continuous, of your procedures, but also of your collections. Yes, about our collections. So we have collected since 1966 soil materials. We have so we have different sub-collections on about 1,200 sites in the world, in about 85 countries. We have made a full description of the sites including geology, land use, vegetation, so everything around a particular point. And then within the profile, we've made a full profile description, soil sampling for every horizon, and then collected a column from the soil wall, which is preserved to create a soil monolith, which then can be preserved over time and shown in our museum. And associated with each of these sites, we have soil samples from the pits, which is about 5,000 to 7,000 with chemical and physical data analyzed. And then in the past, we took thin sections also from those soil profiles. So those are slices of soil preserved in lacquer that can be studied under an electron microscope. And they were collected and analyzed in a consistent way. So that means that we always used the international protocols available. And of course, those protocols evolved over time, but we tried to use the standard protocol so that the data of the collection are intercomparable. Most of these profiles that we have in our collection were also analyzed in a certified reference lab. I think a large percent was analyzed in our own lab at ISRIC when we had it, which also is important for consistency of the data in the whole set of the collection. Well, the whole collection is used for a wide variety of purpose. Of course, you see the profiles behind me on the wall in the museum. I'm in the museum right now. So core pieces of our collection are shown in our World Soil Museum, both physical and online in our virtual museum. And also our samples are used for research. Well, you see the different partial collections here in the photographs. We also have images from the sites where we collected the soils, and those images are also available in a separate database on our webpage of the collections. So, of course, if you have a collection, you need a good structure and a good system to describe the collection by and to organize your collection by. And metadata is very important in that. So for whatever object you have, if it's an image or a soil sample or the soil monolith, it needs properly documentation according to a proper standard. And well, we use metadata models for that. And also one of our main discriminative let's say, principle in our collection is the soil classification. That is also an important, and it started with the FEO legend, and now we use the WRB classification as one of the prime classification tools for our collection. We also classify the collection in other systems like the USDA soil taxonomy, and if there's a local classification available, we also add that to the information that is available for every particular soil. Yeah, so very short about the World Reference Base for Soil Resources. It's an international system for naming soils. It evolved from the legend of the soil map of the world. And it is governed and further developed by the International Union of Soil Science. There's a working group within the IUSS that dedicates its time to further develop, test, and promote the World Reference Base for Soil Resources as a system for naming soils. It's a global classification system for soils. And well, you can find information on that. It has its own website if you're interested in that. Sorry. Yes, purpose of and use of the reference collection. So yeah, I already discussed this a bit, that it's a baseline for which new observation can be compared. We use it for education, but also study formation and functions of soils and human influence. Every soil monolith and associated samples provides a snapshot in of a particular point in time and space. Yeah, and I think this is a repetition of earlier what I earlier said. So how do we collect that? We go to the field, well prepared, and we have a standard procedure for full description and taking samples in the field. And of course, the prime sample in the field, apart from the samples from the horizons, are the columns that we take in a box and then it's brought to Wageningen, where we prepare it with lacquer for sustainable conservation. And here you see a few an example how we collected soil molders in different countries, including Africa. So when it arrives here, there's a whole procedure for preparing and managing the samples that come in. The monolith preparation is one important part of the procedure. So we get the box in, we let it air dry, we add a glue, so a transparent glue, so it is conserved. It's fixed to a board so that it can be shown on the wall, and then that's not all, because we also need to prepare the data. So the field forms are entered, the morphological data and the site data are entered into a database, and then the soil monoliths, once they are prepared, they are photographed in high resolution, because I talk about the physical soil collections, but in fact that's difficult to discriminate because the physical soil collections are also available digitally, both the data but also the images of the soil monoliths that we collect for the virtual soil museum and online access. The samples, when we have new samples coming in, there's also a whole procedure for that. They're stored, they're air dried, they're sieved, they're stored in new containers, labeled, barcoded, registered. They get a unique registration, and new samples are processed, and then they are sent to a reference lab. And that can, in the past few years, we have collaborated with the Kellogg Soil Survey Lab of the USDA in the United States, and physical analysis are done in Wageningen. We also have a micromorphology collection. We do not collect actively thin sections anymore, but we have a large collection, thousands of thin sections connected to the reference collection. And they're also valuable, and we are in the process of making them available digitally. So we are scanning all these. That's Livia, our colleague, that scans these thin sections, and then we will make them available at a certain time online. And they're connected to this wealth of soil information that we have for each of the profiles that are in our reference collection. And we have other thin sections collections as well. So orphan collections that were brought to us under our management. Yes, about the soil image library. So they're connected to all the sites that we have samples for. I think making registry, photographic registry in soils is often forgotten. People focus when they are in the field on description, analysis, but making a good picture of the soil profile is an important part of the procedure of scientific description in the field. And I think that's often overlooked, and that's really a pity, because when we study soils, first of all, we can use these images for many purposes: education, promotion of soils, advocacy, but also to study the soil. If we go back to the analysis or the description, it's very valuable to have a good image of what the soil looked like at the moment of description and sampling, including the site around the soil pit. And that gives valuable information about properties of the site, the field, the surface properties of soil, land use, vegetation, etc. So I would advocate that people do that and also make that available online. Well, we have our images available online. That's a continuous work. Collection management is really an intense work. It needs specialization and also attention, continuous attention, to keep it up to date and make it accessible. So the image library. And we have another part of our archive are soil survey reports and maps. And that is also important because soil survey reports and maps are the end product of a very labor and financial intensive project. A map that is produced require a whole team and often many years, many people to dedicate time to create a map, to go to the field for supportive soil description analysis, to create a legend, create a paper map, and that's valuable information. And the issue with paper maps and reports is that they have the tendency to be either locked in the archives of institutes, and they have a tendency to get lost because they lack proper registration, so they are inaccessible, unfindable, or they are under the process of decay, that the paper degrades, or they are borrowed out, and then the last copy is lost. So ISRIC has a large country library, and we find often requests from the source countries that they request us for a digital copy of that source because it's no longer available. So it's also a way of data rescue and safeguarding information that has been produced in the past. And we are in the process, a continuous process of scanning that information. So you see our colleague Livia there that is scanning reports and maps, and about 85% of the maps in our holdings are digitally available online through our ISRIC soil library, and about 25% of the reports. And here you see an example, our web portal, that if you Google ISRIC soil library map collection, you'll find a search screen. And if you search on keywords, you'll get a selection based on those keywords. So for instance, soils in Africa, and you get a listing of all kinds of maps, and you can refine that search parameters by adding more words. For instance, if you look on soils and Kenya, you get a listing and you see icons left of the resource where there's a globe. It means that the map is downloadable, and where there's an E with a book there, then it means the report is downloadable. So for instance, for Kenya, we have the exploratory soil map and agroclimatic zone report of Kenya, and there are a range of maps in that report which are digitally available, like the exploratory soil map of Kenya and the agroclimatic zone map of Kenya. So yeah, that's a way to access and make accessible our collections. This is a repetition. We have been in the process in the past decade of making also the physical samples online available. So we have made high resolution images of all the soil monoliths, so that in the museum website, when you go to the museum website, wsm.isric.org, you can explore. We have collection searches. You can search by country or by soil type, and then when you click on the image, you get the high resolution image of the monolith. And when you click on the name, you get the database file with all the morphological and chemical data associated with it. We also made other ways to connect the collection to other sources, so that you can get it a perspective, put it in the context of actually the sites where they were sampled. So there's a global map. You can click on the object that is in the museum, and also change with a remote sensing image to see actually the field or the forest or wherever it is that the sample was collected at the time. Land use may have changed. We have a rice soil, for instance, that is now in an urban area because the city expanded over that agricultural field over time. But it's a way of making the collection more valuable for education and exploration. So a few words about purpose of soil reference collection. They provide a reference for evolving international classification systems, as I mentioned, for instance, the WRB. When a new diagnostic property or horizon or criterion is defined, we can go back to the reference collection and test actually if that diagnostic, how that works out in the classification of existing profiles. It's a basis for research when you have samples available that were researched in the past for soil formation, soil properties, soil fertility, and other functions and methodology development. And of course, when you have monoliths, it's a unique source for education and advocacy. Some examples of how our reference samples were used. We have thousands of reference samples of known properties, so that's valuable for research. And we have had requests, and that collection is available for research if it adds to the current knowledge. So for instance, our whole collection was measured for spectral analysis, and a new spectral library was, global spectral library was developed in collaboration with ICRAF to develop low-cost quick methods for soil sampling and analysis for local soil fertility advice in Africa. And you see here some images of that, and about almost, well, 4,500 soil samples were analyzed to create that library. We have had student research, for instance, to try to develop an estimation of soil carbon from smartphone images, the RGB spectra, and using our analysis for that, our collection for that. And here you see the student with our technician in the process of doing both visual color assessment and both using a hand phone and to derive then information and see if there's a reliable carbon assessment from that. There are other studies specifically that produced also scientific articles, for instance, estimating clay content from the water content of soils, and other chemical analysis based on our collection. And so correlate different phosphate analysis to see if we can make new prediction models for that. But also, I think that holds true for every collection. You can go back to a collection with new questions. For instance, when the Chernobyl disaster happened, we got requests for samples, global soil samples, because people wanted to have a baseline from before the Chernobyl disaster and take new samples and then compare that to have an estimate of the amount of radiation for those sites after and before Chernobyl disaster. And there may be other new questions that come in the future. Thin sections, the same, they are available for archaeological research, for instance, but also for clay or carbon research. And recently we got, this is a new technique for us that we hadn't applied to our collection, but will be applied, is in the process of being applied now with 2 Chinese universities. We will analyze our whole collection for DNA analysis. So even on sieved and dried samples, you can have a DNA profile that gives information on the biodiversity in soils, and that is actually going on now. So that's a new question that our collection is valuable for. We also lend out our collection. We have multiple museums. The Natural History Museum in London. There's a museum in Orléans. We have a museum of natural sciences in Spain that has a long-term loan of our monoliths, and also in Leuven there was a special. You see here an example of the special exhibition in 2015, the International Year of Soils, in Madrid, and this is a big exposition that was held in Leuven, Africa in Profile. Beautiful exposition, still available as a virtual exposition online, which used 40 of our monoliths there. And there may be many future possible applications for calibration of models, for estimation soil properties, evaluate soil change and land use impact, and so to go back to the sites that were samples earlier and do backtrack monitoring and see the soil change over time. Benchmark of soils in their natural state, so Chernozems before changes and after agricultural use, for instance. And yeah, I mentioned already radioactive fallout, and now we have all kind of persistent chemicals in nature and that are PFAS, for instance, so phosphate-related chemicals. And then it's interesting to have a reference from before the introduction of those chemicals. Yes, there are other measurement methods. For instance, this is a LiDAR, for instance, you can that was used on our monoliths. So things that we do not think of in the past, but are available now. So I think that archives consolidate our work in the lab and the field, and they help us study the past, the present, and answer questions of the future. So I realized that establishing an archive involves resources, human and financial resources, and also you have to dedicate time, and also you have to think about clients, because we do not collect just for fun. You also have to think about how you can serve people with it, and that can be a paid service or a free service, but it requires a management system in place and protocols. And with that, with the picture of some of our samples in the collection, I end my presentation. I would like to open the floor for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Stephan, for the very informative presentation. I may ask our guests to feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question or express your opinion about the presentation. So please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hello, Stephan.
Hello.
Yeah, this is Samuel from IITA in Ibadan, Nigeria. I wish to commend your effort for the work you have been doing over the years, particularly in the collection of particularly in these collections, because you've told us what a collection is now, what an archive is. So we should not be say collection of archives. So thank you very much. I think it's an interesting and impressive work you have done so far. But I wish to mention, because I wish you asked, you said you have about 80-something different countries where these collections have been made. And I'm sure 2 African countries will be, some of them will be included, but we have no idea of the map. It would have been good if we see the map or the list of the countries where this collection have been made, and maybe your current efforts or future efforts. Because looking at the numbers you have, so I know it's not all encompassing. There's still a need for improvement and to even collect more. So I wish to know what is your current strategy or focus to collect, to increase the collection, so to say, in terms of the monoliths and the rest that you are collecting. And maybe some major countries in Africa that are still missing. I'm particularly interested in Africa, that are still missing, that you wish to collect. And we'll see how we can strategize and even collaborate to increase the collection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel, for that question. Yes, so we have about 1,000 to 1,200 monoliths and sites. And from our collection management policy, because our collection should be representative for the soil map of the world, so the larger variation that we have of soils in the world. So that is our purpose, to show that variation of soils, repetitive in landscapes and regions. And what we lack, well, by the way, you'll be happy to know that we have soils from the IITA campus as well. So I think about 4 soils from IITA that were collected, I think, in the 70s. But of course, our collection is rarely complete, and we also have gaps in our collection according to what we would like to collect. And our gaps are mostly in inaccessible areas, or areas where it's difficult to sample soil. So the permafrost, the deserts, Sahara, the very steep mountain regions, those Central Asia, we lack profiles. We don't have a lot of profiles there. We have a good representation in Africa. Of course, we should have more. We have had very active campaigns of sampling from 1966 onwards, and we always collaborate with national partners. So in the process, often we would help them to start their own collection. And so we would do the work in the field and establish sample double, one for the local partner, one for us. And in that process, many local exhibitions and often evolved to soil museums in their nations. So I think there are now about 38 soil museums in the world, and many of them started in collaboration with us. For the moment, we don't have an active program on that. That's simply a matter of funding. But now that soils are high on the policy agenda again, or maybe, yeah, well, maybe again, I noticed there's much more demand and desire to be more active in the field of showing soils, do advocacy and education. So there's a lot of interest for establishing an exhibition, for instance. And so, yeah, I hope we can revitalize that program and start this collaboration again with nations, regions to help partners to establish a collection and at the same time enrich our own collection. So yeah, that is my answer to your question, Samuel. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Stephan. Thank you, Samuel. Stephan, it was an early question in the chat on the WhatsApp groups asking for the person from Nigeria and also from Egypt. They ask about, I would like to create a museum of our local soil in my institution. How do I go about it? And I need information, please. So how do you advise them to start?
I would start with the purpose of the museum, because in discussions I sometimes notice that people start with just with a broad idea, but I think it's good to wonder what fits with your institute, what is the story that you want to tell, what is the information you want to provide, and within that you first think about what are the boundaries of your collection. So what do you want to collect for what purpose? Because you can simply collect, but then you will find that there are things that are not so relevant, and then you have to de-accession again. So it's very important that you start with a policy, with thinking about what do we want to collect. And many soil survey institutes, for instance, or soil information centers, they provide information about the soils in their region or their country. So that's a good baseline. You think about the soils, the larger variation in your country, and then you would collect good examples for that. And that is then, for instance, let me give one example. We have the Soil Museum in Thailand started with a collection in collaboration with us. They have a full museum now, and they continue to collect soil examples from every unit of their soil map, and they use that actually in education, in discussion with farmers even. Yeah, so that's I think it starts with that, and then you have procedures. So do you want to have a good archive of the documentation of the soils in paper, reports and maps? Do you want to store soil samples? And do you want to have developed monoliths? And for each of these sub collections, there are procedures on how to do that effectively and adequately. So to have a paper archive, you have to have metadata record, a database, a way to store them, a numbering system, etc. And the same for soil samples. Soil samples need a proper process, sieving, drying, and then store them in a container. That container needs a unique labeling system for access, etc. And also the monolith procedure. So yeah, that is, I think, my answer to that question. And then if you look for ways, of course, a collection and an exhibition also need labor and financial means to start it and maintain it over time. It needs to be a sustainable project. So also you need a funding base for that. And it can either be national or an international collaboration. So you need an acquisition procedure for that as well.
Thank you very much. There's also another question saying, can that be also done to show on soil erosion level?
That's a good question. I often get questions in the museum that people would like to see impact of human action. So that can be in multiple ways: erosion, nutrient decline, salinization, so different types of degradation. And I think certainly, yes, I think it's very relevant because people often, well, first of all, people other than soil scientists are not very much aware of soil, its functions, and what the soil resource is. But certainly erosion is something that is, well, you have man-made soil erosion, human-made soil erosion, induced soil erosion. And I think it's very relevant to show that. And that can be done, for instance, by taking a profile from under natural conditions and a profile after erosion and show them together. And it can be done by pictures, but it can also be done by showing a soil monolith, taking from the two different situations. And we have in the museum, for instance, also soil profiles with salinization that clearly shows salinization as one of the processes of soil decline or soil degradation.
Thank you very much. There's also another question, Stephan, says like, doing this soil collection will take a lot of time and effort, and also on a financial aspect. So do you think writing project proposal or idea can really be attractive for getting fund on this?
It used to be when between the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, we had active funding for collaboration with countries to develop our collection and the national collections. That dried up more or less. Those possibilities reduced to a great extent. But I think now is the time again, because the policy is high on the agenda. Many organizations are including soil in their policies, in their way of working. So I think now is the time again to think about that, and also I'm sure there will be avenues for requesting funding for this kind of activity, or include it in a larger project as one of the components for advocacy and education. Take, for instance, the European Union. The European Union has a EU soil mission, so they want to implement various policies on soil quality, soil health, and together with that, you have to have soil literacy. And it is realized that the larger public is often unaware of soils. So you need to, so the European Union, for instance, implements a program on soil literacy so that the larger public understand soils, and also will accept the soil policies that are put in place. And I think in Africa, with the African Union, there's also a much stronger position on soils now. So yeah, I think now is the time, and I'm sure that funding avenues will become available.
Thank you very much. I have one last question from my side, saying that it's extremely exciting topic, but is there any way to have this exhibition or collection in easier way? I'm not sure what does that mean, but maybe like not a physical one.
Well, I think you can start, as I said, first of all, I think it's important that soil scientists, especially if you're a part of an institute for soil information, soil survey, it's important to make a complete record of what we observe and sample in the field. Not just for that purpose, momentary purpose, but to make a complete record. And that includes making a good image of the site where you are, because that is a snapshot in time of the land use that will change over time, but also of the soil profile wall. And that can be used if you have the data complete, and the description. You can start with, when we started the Soil Museum in 1966, there was no virtual space. So we just had physical objects to be shown in a physical space. But now we have the online community that we can serve for people that cannot visit our museum. So you always have to think also about the virtual space. And if you have no funds, no possibility now to develop a physical collection, you can start with a digital collection and have sites represented by good images and the description and all the data associated with it.
Thank you very much. We have a comment from Eric. It says it will be nice to have an African soil museum from African countries, and in what way can ISRIC contribute to that?
Yeah, I think, well, I refer back to the earlier answers. I think we are open for collaboration if we find a way to, if we find also a funding avenue for that, and then we could collaborate, especially if it's in a broader sense, like also having the other parts of the soil information workflow. But I think it's really valuable that we need also a funding opportunity for that. At the same time, I mean, as was commented before, it takes time and resources to develop a collection, but you have to start somewhere. If you want to have a direct use for your purpose, you can refer to the World Soil Museum website, where there are a range of profiles from Africa available, and hopefully also from your country. There's also the Africa in Profile virtual exposition, which largely used the ISRIC collections as well, but puts very nicely into perspective of the landscapes, the geology, the land management in Africa. And that has a virtual tour and also web pages on the Leuven website. And I think after this presentation, we will make those links available as well to the community.
Thank you very much, Stephan, for the informative presentation, for being available today to showcase the soil archiving and collection, the museum, to our members and all other audience. And thank you very much for all our attendance. I have one more question, I think.
Yes, I see that. The limitation from
Yes.
yeah, the
One
limitation
was
of developing museum has been the sources of funds and convincing leaders to allocate funds. Any advice towards it? Yeah, I think I see so much development also in Africa on the aspect of soil, so much better organization and interconnection. So, and as I said, there is much more also with the policymakers, and therefore also the funding. So I'm hoping that we will have more possibilities for education and advocacy and research on soils connected to collection. So I don't have any other practical advice than to look for those opportunities which are there and include establishing of collection and in relation to advocacy and education in your project proposals. And if ISRIC can help with that, then we are ready to.
Thank you very much. I hope it answered your question. If there is no more question, then we shall end our showcase for today. Thank you very much, Stephan, once again. And
thank
to
you, Crown
all,
Eric, for this
thank you.
opportunity.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for all our audience and our guests, and wish you all a good day.